Well, for more, let's cross to Strasbourg, France, speak to Julien Labarre, political scientist at the University of Zurich. Hello to you. Julien, this was a bombshell report. What did you make of these alleged contents of that letter?
Well, it's really hard to tell at this point, whether we should experience some form of disbelief or shock or outrage or a mixture of all of that. I think the American people is experiencing a mixture of all of that. If the allegations are true, this is absolutely damaging for the president, even though this would have happened, 20 years ago. But the reality is we also need to keep in mind that there is context around this, right? Trump has a history of sexual misconduct and lewdness, right? We remember the Access Hollywood tape that was released in 2016. We remember comments that President Trump has made in the past about his own daughter, Ivanka, but also the fact that he was found guilty of sexual abuse against E. Jean Carroll, right? So this comes within a broader context, and I think people also have that in mind.
Right, and the other context I might add there is that this U.S. president is very litigious. He's been very critical of media, so for the Wall Street Journal to bring this story forward, you would think it would dot all its I's and cross its T's and be very careful about what it's going to publish, wouldn't you?
That's right. Now, the Wall Street Journal doesn't specify whether they verify the authenticity of that letter. But the Wall Street Journal is protected by quite a lot of jurisprudence around freedom of the press. We could think about New York Times v. Sullivan, which was a Supreme Court case back in 1964, where the Supreme Court already decided on whether libel laws infringe on the First Amendment rights to freedom of expression and freedom of the press. And they said that it did. So in order for the Wall Street Journal to be found guilty of libel, like the president has threatened to do so, he would need to prove that the Wall Street Journal has actually known that this was a false letter and that they've decided to release it anyways as part of reckless disregard of the truth.
No, but part of what's important here isn't even whether Trump would win that lawsuit. It's just the fact that he would be willing to bring this lawsuit. We saw CBS settle with the U.S. president. So when Trump says threatens to sue, quote, the ass off of the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch, would it just come down to a blinking contest between Trump and Murdoch?
Most likely. But, one thing that you brought up, and you're actually right, is that, I don't think that bringing the lawsuit would actually matter for the people who are turning against him today, right? There's this thing called, in political science literature, called the conspiracy mindset, which is a sort of psychological orientation that some people have to sort of interpret anything that comes their way as a sort of signal of a conspiracy. And, this would actually play into the definition of a conspiracy theory, which is powerful people trying to withhold information from the public. I think people would probably interpret this as a way to silence sort of damaging information from coming out.
And that same argument can be used among Trump's own base, the fact that they were so public about saying, we're going to release the Epstein files, we're going to release the Epstein files, and now they're saying, oh, it's a hoax. So how divided is his base? Is it just a handful of prominent influencers, or is there a real fragmentation of Trump supporters?
Well, it's hard to say. I think what you're talking about really is a sort of fragment of the MAGA base, which has been fed for many years with conspiracy theories after conspiracy theories. And, there's continuity in these parallel realities that MAGA has created for itself. We could think about QAnon and the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, and now the Jeffrey Epstein story. The one through line between all of them is sort of child sexual exploitation, right? So those people have been fed this kind of narrative for years. Right. So there is definitely a segment of Trump supporters who will have a hard time letting this go. Now, there's also a fragment of the Republican Party that is definitely more loyalist than conspiracy theorists. Right. And I think that, for instance, Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, who are really at the eye of the storm at the moment, right, the attorney general and the director of the FBI, those people are loyalists. Right. And they represent a fragment of the GOP that is not going to let go of their support for President Trump.
And next year we have midterm elections. Do you think there's going to be any, I mean, a lot can happen in a day or a week or a month. Not needless to say, there's midterm elections. So what do you think is next in this whole saga?
I don't know. Some people are saying that maybe the way out of this controversy would be to fire Pam Bondi or Kash Patel or maybe the deputy director of the FBI, Dan Bongino. I don't know that President Trump wants to fire those people because he's placed them in those positions precisely because they're there to protect him, right? So I don't know that he doesn't value them more than the damage or sort of damage control he could do by firing them. In terms of the election, I don't think that this is necessarily going to be all that determinative. We know that historically, midterm elections usually don't play in the favor of the president because the president simply is not on the ballot. And so dissatisfied voters who don't like the president will just take it out on his party. The people who are satisfied with Trump are not going to be as motivated to turn out, right? So I don't know how this is going to play out, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be all that determinative.